Well, look, as you know, and I spoke about it earlier this week, the president was flexible in granting an extension of the ceasefire throughout this time. The president has decided to dispatch Special Envoy Witkoff and Jared Kushner back to Islamabad. The Iranians want to talk. They want to talk in person. And so the president is, as I've said many, many times to all of you, always willing to give diplomacy a chance. So Steve and Jared will be heading to Pakistan tomorrow to hear the Iranians out. We hope progress will be made, and we hope that positive developments will come from this meeting.
This should not be America's fight alone. We barely use the Strait of Hormuz as a country. Our energy doesn't flow through there, and we have plenty of energy. Just look at the new global Congo line, headed to Texas. A beautiful picture. Europe and Asia have benefited from our protection for decades, but the time for free riding is over. America and the free world deserve allies who are capable, who are loyal, and who understand that being an ally is not a one-way street. It's a two-way street. We are not counting on Europe, but they need the Strait of Hormuz much more than we do, and might want to start doing less talking and having less fancy conferences in Europe and get in a boat. This is much more their fight than ours.
Pay close attention to what is happening right now, because the world is sitting on a powder keg and the fuse has already been lit. If you think the Iran war is winding down, if you believe the ceasefire talk and the diplomatic hand-wringing represents genuine progress, I need you to stop, sit down and watch every single second of what I'm about to tell you. Because the signals coming out of Tehran, Beijing, Islamabad and Washington in the last 48 hours are not signals of peace. They are signals that the people in power are once again preparing for something catastrophic, and they are banking on you not watching closely enough to notice. Hit the like button, share this with someone who needs to understand what is actually happening, and subscribe, because this conversation does not get easier and we are not going anywhere. Let us start with the one data point that should send a shiver down every spine on this planet. On the 24th of April 2026, China's embassy in Tehran and its consulates across Iran issued a formal advisory urging Chinese citizens to leave Iran as soon as possible. The Chinese government described the regional situation as fragile. They used the words complex and volatile. They told their people to avoid sensitive locations, government buildings, military facilities, and to contact Chinese diplomatic missions immediately if anything goes wrong. Now, you might hear that and think, governments issue travel advisories all the time. That is true, but here is the critical thing you absolutely must know. China issued almost the exact same warning on the 27th of February 2026. Word for word, tone for tone, urgency for urgency. And on the 28th of February 2026, the very next day, the United States and Israel began their bombing campaign against Iran. Let that sink in for a moment. The last time China told its citizens to get out of Iran, bombs were falling within 24 hours, and now they have done it again. That is not a coincidence. That is a pattern. That is intelligence. Beijing has eyes and ears inside Tehran that Washington and Tel Aviv can only dream about. When China moves its people out of a country, it is because China knows something the rest of us are only beginning to piece together. And right now, China knows enough to tell every one of its nationals, get out now. Do not wait for the situation to clarify, because by the time it clarifies, it will be too late. We have an expression in journalism, follow the money. But in geopolitics, you follow the evacuations. When a superpower starts moving its people out of a country, the decision to escalate has not just been considered, it has been made. The paperwork is being filed somewhere. The target lists have been finalized. The only question remaining is timing. Now let me take you to Islamabad, because it is one of the most diplomatically complicated and frankly bewildering situations I have seen play out in real time in years. Iran's Foreign Minister Abbas Araghchi arrived in the Pakistani capital on the 25th of April 2026 for meetings with Pakistani officials. He is on a three-country tour, stopping in Islamabad first, then heading to Muscat in Oman, and then continuing to Moscow. Pakistan has been acting as a crucial back channel between Tehran and Washington, and the Pakistanis have done something genuinely remarkable. They have kept both sides at the table, or at least at adjacent tables in the same capital, which in the current climate of maximum hostility between the United States and Iran is no small achievement. Pakistani mediators have been described as cautiously optimistic. That phrase is diplomatic language, for we have absolutely no idea if this is going to hold together, but we are praying very hard that it does. Here is where the situation becomes genuinely complicated, and I need you to follow this carefully, because the competing claims and counterclaims being made in real time tell you everything you need to know about how serious any of this diplomacy actually is. The White House confirmed on Friday, the 24th of April, that Jared Kushner and Steve Witkoff would fly to Islamabad the following morning for what Press Secretary Caroline Leavitt described as direct talks intermediated by the Pakistanis with representatives from the Iranian delegation. She said the Iranians had reached out and asked for the in-person conversation exactly as President Trump had publicly demanded they do. Trump himself told Reuters in a phone call that Iran would be making an offer, though he acknowledged he did not yet know the details, and added with his characteristic detachment from the gravity of the moment, "We will have to see." But here is what Iran said. Iran's foreign ministry spokesperson Esmail Baghai issued a clear, unambiguous statement. He wrote, "No meeting is planned to take place between Iran and the United States." He added that Iran's observations would be conveyed to Pakistan, not to the Americans directly, to Pakistan. The Iranians are refusing direct talks but are willing to pass messages through Islamabad. Iran's own semi-official news agency Tasnim confirmed this position independently. So did Nua news agency, which is directly affiliated with Iran's Supreme National Security Council. Both outlets stated plainly that Araqchi would not be speaking with American officials. This is not a translation error. This is not a miscommunication between foreign ministries working across a language barrier. This is two governments making two completely opposite statements about what is happening in the same building in the same city at the same moment. And that contradiction right there is the entire story in miniature. What does it tell us? It tells us that Washington is desperately trying to project the image of diplomatic momentum because the war on Iran has not gone the way Trump promised. You will remember that administration officials originally floated a 4 to 6 week timeline for this conflict. We are now 56 days in. The goals the administration publicly articulated at the start have shifted so many times they have become almost unrecognizable. First, the justification was nuclear weapons. Then there was talk of regime change. Then there were references to the safety of Iranian protesters needing protection. The goalposts have not merely moved, they have been picked up, thrown onto a flatbed truck, and driven to an entirely different stadium. Now let me talk about the figures the Trump administration actually dispatched to Islamabad, because the composition of the delegation tells its own story. Jared Kushner is the president's son-in-law. He is a real estate developer from New York. Steve Witkoff is a wealthy property developer who has known Trump for decades and who has been deployed previously as an envoy in negotiations about Gaza and who has sat across the table from Vladimir Putin in discussions about Ukraine. These are not career diplomats. These are not foreign service officers who have spent decades learning the history, languages, culture, and fault lines of the broader Middle East. They are Trump's personal emissaries, men whose primary qualification for these missions is their personal relationship with the president himself. Now, that relationship can sometimes be an asset. Envoys who speak directly for the president and are trusted by him can sometimes move faster and cut through bureaucracy in ways career diplomats cannot. But in a situation this complex, with this much at stake, there are serious questions about whether personal loyalty to one man is an adequate substitute for institutional knowledge and professional expertise. Vice President J.D. Vance was not on the flight to Islamabad this weekend, and that fact matters more than it might initially appear. Vance was the one who led the first American delegation to Pakistan in the earlier round of negotiations. He has been described as deeply involved in the process. Press Secretary Leavitt said Vance would be on standby in the United States, ready to fly to Pakistan if necessary, but the specific condition reportedly attached to Vance traveling is revealing. Multiple accounts indicate that Vance would only make the trip if Mohammad Bakir Ghalibaf, Speaker of the Iranian Parliament, also committed to participating. Ghalibaf has not confirmed he is going, so Vance has not gone. The Americans are essentially saying, send your significant figure and we will send ours. The Iranians are saying, we are not even certain we are having talks at all. This is the state of diplomacy in the 56th day of this war. Ghalibaf himself is not a background player here. He is not a parliamentary administrator who stamps bills into law and attends ceremonial functions. Mohammad Bakir Ghalibaf is a former commander in the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps Air Force. He is a former chief of the Iranian National Police. He is a former mayor of Tehran. He has run for the presidency of Iran multiple times. He is a significant figure with deep institutional roots across Iran's military, security, and political establishment. And in recent days, he has issued a warning that deserves to be taken seriously rather than dismissed as propaganda. Ghalibaf warned the United States directly that American treasury bonds are, in his formulation, a house of cards. He signaled that Iran is positioned to influence global energy pricing through its leverage over the Strait of Hormuz. He is not speaking theoretically or metaphorically. He is describing a concrete strategic tool that Iran possesses and is willing to use. The Strait of Hormuz is not just any body of water. Approximately 20% of the world's oil supply passes through that strait. 1 in 5 barrels moves through a narrow channel that Iran sits alongside. If Iran significantly disrupts traffic through the Strait of Hormuz, oil prices do not merely rise, they spike in ways that send cascading shockwaves through every economy on Earth, and they do so quickly because oil markets price in anticipated supply disruptions before those disruptions fully materialize. We are already seeing early friction. The United States Navy has intercepted an Iranian-flagged vessel near the strait. At least 33 ships have been redirected since a naval blockade began on the 13th of April. 33 ships in a matter of weeks. That is not a maritime incident. That is a sustained confrontation at one of the most strategically critical choke points in the world. Now think through what Ghalibaf's threat about treasury bonds actually means in economic terms. If a Hormuz disruption sends oil prices sharply higher, inflation rises across every oil importing economy. When inflation rises, central banks raise interest rates. When interest rates rise, the cost of servicing the United States national debt increases significantly on a debt measured in the tens of trillions of dollars. A sustained energy price shock could impose costs on American consumers and the American government that dwarf the military expenditure in Iran itself. Trump said the war has had less effect on stocks and oil prices than he expected. That may be true today. We are in the early chapters of this economic story. The later chapters have not yet been written. While all of this unfolds diplomatically and militarily, something is happening in the humanitarian sphere that is not receiving the attention it deserves. The World Food Programme has issued an alarm that food insecurity is alarmingly high in 10 countries. In Gaza specifically, food prices have risen by 85% since the Iran war began, in a territory already experiencing a catastrophic humanitarian crisis before this conflict started. A family already struggling to buy basic food now faces prices nearly double what they were weeks ago. You cannot bomb a region into stability while simultaneously pricing its population out of the ability to eat. You create conditions for a generation of grievance that outlasts every ceasefire and every peace deal by decades. On the Lebanese front, Trump has extended the Israel-Lebanon ceasefire by 3 weeks following a second round of Washington talks. A ceasefire extended is better than a ceasefire collapsed. But Netanyahu's response tells you exactly how solid this arrangement is. He said Israel will continue striking any threat that is not the language of a leader committed to durable peace. That is the language of a leader accepting a pause, not a conclusion. Satellite imagery has documented the scale of Israeli destruction in southern Lebanon that preceded this latest extension. When the next escalation comes, and the pattern of this conflict gives every reason to expect it will, Lebanon's south will have less infrastructure, fewer hospitals, 4 Kamdama hospitals and the before in. Let me turn now to what is happening inside the American government, because it tells you something important about the institutional coherence of the apparatus prosecuting this war. The Pentagon has fired Navy Secretary John Phelan. He is the 34th senior official removed under this administration. In any normal government, the dismissal of a cabinet-level defense official would require congressional scrutiny and public explanation. Here it barely registers before the next firing arrives. The Trump administration has removed so many senior figures at the Department of Defense that the institutional knowledge of the most powerful military organization in human history is being genuinely eroded. You cannot conduct a complex multi-theater military and diplomatic campaign while simultaneously running what amounts to an ongoing purge of experienced leadership. There is also the story of a United States soldier charged with using classified information about a covert raid targeting Venezuelan President Nicolas Maduro to place bets on Polymarket, an online prediction market. A serving member of the armed forces allegedly used access to classified operational details as a personal financial advantage. In the context of active military operations across multiple theaters, the obvious question is not just about this individual, but about what other classified information is being compromised at a moment of maximum operational sensitivity. And amid all of this, the Department of Justice found time to reinstate the firing squad as a federal execution method. I will leave you to draw your own conclusions about where institutional attention is actually being directed. Now let me pull all of these threads together, because there is a larger picture here that is essential to understand. What we are watching is not simply a military confrontation between the United States and Israel on one side and Iran on the other. What we are watching is a realignment of global power, influence, and economic leverage that will shape the international order for decades. And the countries doing the most consequential positioning right now are not necessarily the ones doing the loudest talking. China is moving carefully, deliberately, and in ways that are genuinely difficult for Washington to counter. Beijing's evacuation warning is not only a protective measure, it is a message to every country that watches China's behavior for signals about where real power lies. When China tells its people to leave, it is telling the global south, we know what is coming, we prepared our people, and we are not the ones who started it. That positioning builds trust and opens doors in capitals that American foreign policy is simultaneously closing through sheer unpredictability. Russia is also benefiting quietly from this situation. Araghchi's tour takes him from Islamabad to Muscat and then to Moscow, not to Brussels, not to Geneva, not to New York, to Moscow. Russia has become a central node in Iran's diplomatic network, a development already underway before this war and now dramatically accelerated. The two countries have been pushed together by sanctions, by exclusion from Western financial systems, and by the shared experience of confrontation with American-backed military force. That convergence carries strategic consequences that extend well beyond the current conflict. Pakistan's role deserves genuine recognition. The Pakistanis have managed to position themselves as an indispensable intermediary in one of the most dangerous conflicts of the post-Cold War era. That is a significant achievement for a country navigating its own economic pressures and internal tensions while being squeezed by the competing pulls of great power rivalry. They have kept both sides in the same city, passing messages through legitimate channels, maintaining the infrastructure of communication at a moment when communication could mean the difference between escalation and catastrophe. But here is the reality that I cannot set aside. The cautious optimism of Pakistani mediators and the back-channel messages are happening simultaneously with China evacuating its citizens. They are happening while the United States Navy blockades Iranian ports and redirects dozens of ships from the Strait of Hormuz. They are happening while Ghalibaf warns that American financial instruments rest on foundations as stable as a house of cards. They are happening while Trump says he does not know what offer Iran will make and adds, with striking casualness about catastrophic possibilities, we will have to see. Diplomacy and military escalation are not running on separate tracks here. They are running on the same track in opposite directions at increasing speed. There is a concept in international relations called coercive diplomacy. Negotiate while maintaining maximum military pressure, using the credible threat of force to compel the other side toward terms they would otherwise reject. The United States has used this approach throughout its history with variable results. The Cuban Missile Crisis of October 1962 is often cited as a success story, though the actual resolution involved a secret agreement by President Kennedy to remove American Jupiter missiles from Turkey, a concession not disclosed to the American public for years. The public narrative of Soviet capitulation was, as these narratives almost always are, a politically convenient simplification of a far messier reality. Whether coercive diplomacy can work here, I have genuine doubts. It worked in 1962 partly because the Soviet Union was not facing an existential threat to its national identity or governmental legitimacy. Khrushchev had room to make a deal and remain in power. Iran in 2026 is in a fundamentally different position. The Islamic Republic has absorbed direct military strikes on its own territory. The nationalist sentiment that military attacks reliably generate, even among populations deeply critical of their own government, is real and powerful. Every missile that fell on Iranian soil strengthened the argument of those inside the Iranian system who have always said that accommodation with America is not just naive but strategically suicidal. And yet Iran is also under pressure that cannot be minimized. The naval blockade is not symbolic. Redirecting 33 ships is a material impact on Iran's capacity to export oil and fund the operations of the state. A government under that kind of sustained economic pressure eventually faces a choice: accept terms or find a way to fundamentally alter the other side's calculations. Iran's answer, through Ghalibaf's statements and its actions at the Strait of Hormuz, is that it intends to choose the latter. It intends to make the costs of this standoff so substantial that Washington is eventually compelled to negotiate on different terms. This is a dangerous calculation. The risk of miscalculation at every step is enormous. A naval confrontation in the Strait of Hormuz that begins as a vessel interception can escalate into an exchange of fire in minutes. That exchange of fire can collapse the ceasefire in hours. A collapsed ceasefire can trigger Israeli air operations and Iranian retaliatory strikes shortly after. And once that sequence begins moving, where it ends becomes genuinely unknowable. We should also be honest about domestic political pressures shaping American decision-making. Trump said the war has had less effect on stocks and oil prices than he expected. That framing tells you his primary metric for evaluating the conflict is its impact on American financial markets. Republicans in Congress are reportedly growing nervous as the 2026 midterm elections approach. That nervousness creates pressure for some form of resolution before November, but political pressure for a quick deal is not the same thing as the conditions necessary for a durable agreement. A deal rushed to meet an electoral calendar that does not address the underlying structural issues is not a resolution, it is a postponement with a shorter fuse. What would a genuine resolution require? The nuclear question needs a framework Iran can accept as consistent with its sovereignty rather than simply Washington and Tel Aviv's maximalist demands. The blockade needs to be lifted in a sequenced, verifiable way. The humanitarian catastrophe needs to be a central element of any agreement, not an afterthought. And the regional security architecture needs reconsidering in ways that do not simply reassert dominance while leaving Iran permanently excluded. None of that is politically easy. All of it is structurally necessary. And right now, what is happening in Islamabad is not yet a peace negotiation in any meaningful sense. It is an exploration of whether a preliminary conversation is even possible. And yet, the fact that Araghchi made the trip to Islamabad matters. The fact that the White House sent envoys matters. The fact that Pakistan has not abandoned its mediating role matters. Diplomacy that produces results very often looks like failure from the outside until the moment it does not. The Oslo Accords began with unauthorized informal meetings between people with no official mandate to be talking at all. History is full of breakthroughs that were invisible right until they happened. But I cannot offer you false comfort with China's evacuation warning hanging over everything like a very specific, very historically grounded alarm bell. Not with 33 ships redirected from Iranian ports and the Strait of Hormuz becoming an active naval confrontation zone. Not with Ghalibaf warning that the financial architecture underpinning American economic power is more fragile than it appears. Not with Trump saying we will have to see while people are going hungry, while officials are being fired, and while Beijing quietly moves its people to safety. The region is not approaching an explosion. The explosion is already in progress. The question is not whether it continues. The question is whether the people with the power to contain it will find the wisdom and courage to do so before what is already burning becomes impossible to extinguish. Based on everything I am watching across these 48 hours, I see maneuvering, I see posturing. I see domestic political calculations overriding strategic judgment. I see a world accelerating faster than the people nominally steering it can manage. Keep watching, keep asking real questions. Share this because the only thing that makes powerful people more careful is knowing that ordinary people are paying attention. Subscribe if you have not already, because this conversation is not over. We are going to keep pulling the threads, following the evacuations, counting the ships, reading the statements from every side carefully enough to notice when they flatly contradict each other. The truth is there always, it is not always comfortable, but it is worth finding.